Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome chef and co-owner of Blue Hill Restaurant, Dan Barber.
Right now, the most innovative thing on my menu happens to fit in the palm of your hand. The genesis for this was a conversation I had about 10 years ago at my restaurant, Blue Hill, with Michael Mazurek, a plant breeder at Cornell University. Public plant breeders create new seeds, new varieties of fruits and vegetables and grains. Michael specializes in squash, which is why I brought him back to the kitchen after his meal, and I held up a butternut squash. And half joking, I said to him, Michael, if you're such a great breeder, why don't you make this thing taste good? Just shrink it. Give it the flavor so I don't have to add the honey or the maple syrup or caramelize it. Start at the beginning. And what he said to me, he looked up, I'll never forget this. He adjusted his glasses and he said, in all my years of breeding, tens of thousands of trials, no one has ever asked me to select for flavor. Lights out, curtain down. I think as a chef, there's a before and after for that interaction. Because what I went on to learn is that public breeding programs today are operating in the breach. Mostly, they are in the hands of big seed companies and agribusiness. And mostly, these are interests pushing for yield and uniformity. Breeders are architects. They create a blueprint for the way we want agriculture to work. Even before farmers plow their fields, the seed is setting the foundation for the kind of food system we want. If yield and uniformity are the determining factors, the cake is pretty much baked. From field to distributor to marketplace, everything falls into place. What if flavor and nutrition got a seat at the table? What if chefs got a seat at the table and created a recipe for the future of food? Because in part, chefs are to blame for the problem. I point the finger at myself. We have brought modernity and innovation into the kitchen, but where ingredients are concerned, we tend to privilege the heirloom and the heritage breed. It's this kind of favoritism that's rooted in a fallacy, that creating great cooking today requires celebrating the flavors of the past. Well, what if we could help create a whole new set of ingredients? New varieties of vegetables and grains that will not only meet the environmental challenges we are bound to face, but do that deliciously. The end result may look something like this. That's after 10 years later, after my conversation with that great public plant breeder, Michael Mazurek, when I asked him, half jokingly, to shrink the thing, he did it. And I know what you're thinking right now. You're thinking novelty exercise. You're thinking a elitist chef's pet project for his kitchen. But I'd like to take a moment to disabuse you of this idea and show you what has happened to the honey nut squash in the last couple of years. We think about this movement between a restaurant and a farm. I'm asking you to consider adding in a seed breeder and asking you to add in the idea that we ask the seed breeder to breed something with a goal in mind, and in this case, it's flavor. And what happened just a few years later was a stable seed, and a small, bespoke, disruptive seed company offered it in their seed catalog. What were they told? They were told this is never going to work. For one thing, no distributor is going to distribute that because there's SKUs for squashes. There's literally a box size. It doesn't fit the box, it's not going to work. And then the marketplace said, forget it. Forget it. Who's going to hold up that big butternut squash and this butternut squash and say, oh yeah, I'll take the smaller one for a little bit more money? No one. So it kind of died in this seed catalog until chefs tasted it. And they put on their menus and they advertised honey nut squash, experimental squash, and they social media'd it, to put a verb to the action. And then farmers started to sell it, just two at the beginning at the Union Square Green Market, a couple blocks from here. And what happened next? Fast forward 2 years, and all of a sudden, other seed companies say, wait a minute, there's some demand. We're hearing about this all over the social media universe. We're going to start putting this as part of our catalogs. And national distribution came out of nowhere. And now I'm fast forwarding 2 years ago, and it is nationally distributed. It's in Trader Joe's. Blue Apron last year harvested 1.3 million pounds. This year they're slated to harvest almost 2 million pounds. The reviews have been spectacular. Costco, Whole Foods, that's where it's headed next. In fact, just recently, a baby food company heard about this squash and called Michael Mazurek and said, Michael, we hear you have an amazing squash. We've gotten bad reports about our baby food, the squash baby food. Can you give us any? He said, yeah, I'll make it for you. And it turns out that the industrial machinery crushed our little baby squash. So Michael, within 2 years, created a squash, the same squash, with a harder skin to withstand the industrial machinery. And now it's going into production. What I left out of our discussion of our new baby up here that's going to change the world is that it was selected for a ripeness indicator. A ripeness indicator means that a farmer knows when it's ripe in the field. I did not know this, but the butternut squash that is called a superfood, that is the most popular squash in the United States of America, is largely picked green. And then it's stored and cured, and it's delivered to our supermarkets, and we heroically add that maple syrup and that honey to make it taste good. What if we created a culture where farmers were incentivized to pick it ripe? Well, I can tell you that what you'll get is jaw-droppingly delicious flavor. I can also tell you that the nutrition on the thing goes off the charts. The carotenoid level just simply doubled for free by this neat little trick. We were not selecting for flavor. We were selecting for deliciousness, and nutrition follows hand in hand. My argument is that we do not need to have a binary choice between flavor and nutrition and yield to feed the world. It's not true. It's a false choice. The yield on our baby butternut squash, our honey nut squash, isn't as good as butternut squash, but it's close. And give us 5 years and a couple $1 million, and we'll get there. But we have to be incentivized by flavor and nutrition. We have to be talking to the breeders, the architects, for the future of our food system to succeed. With that, I thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chairman of Perdue Farms, Jim Perdue.
She's a seed laid back, a boy's dream, drawing hearts in the wind steam. She's a getting you right, knows what you like, and pulls it on like.
Good afternoon. I appreciate you listening to someone talk about their favorite subject is chicken, which is mine. Let's see. So, Perdue Farms is the third largest poultry company in the U.S. by sales, and we're in the top 10 grain companies in the U.S. Exporting and importing grain. And we also have premium pork, beef, and lamb through the Nyman Ranch brand. Each week we harvest around 13 million chickens on family farms, and we've come a long way. The picture at the top or over here is my grandmother, Pearl Parsons, in 1917 when the farms first started growing chickens. So we're 100 years old this year. And she did that while my grandfather was still working to save enough money to start the business. And and to the right is my dad, and he was the first person to really brand and speak for chicken in 1970, and did his own ads also. And he taught us one thing, and that's to listen to the consumer and listen to the customer, and you'll be successful. Now we've done a lot of listening ever since, and this is a dark picture, but it's a reality. There's been a lot of questions and concerns from our consumers over the years, but especially they have a lot of questions. Things like, why do you have to give antibiotics in the feed every day to a healthy chicken? And why are chickens raised in the dark, as you see here? And shouldn't chickens have more room to move around? Well, we listened to these concerns, and just as we always have as a company, and we responded. Here's kind of the direction that we're headed in our poultry houses, very different from what you just saw. And this is actually Sarah Shields from the Humane Society of the United States on one of our tours that I'll talk about in a new chicken house. The business case for changing the way we raise chickens is pretty simple. All Perdue products now are no antibiotics ever in the diet or in the egg of the chicken. We do treat if they're sick, they just don't go out as a Perdue branded product. We're also making significant animal care changes. We're providing a lot more pasture access outside of the chicken house, natural light, as you can see in this photo, enrichments. You see in the insert a ramp, bales of hay, things to get the chickens stimulated to be active, because the key here is reducing stress and the fact that a more active chicken is a healthier chicken, and it actually produces a better product. And we know this because we raise more organic chickens in the United States than anyone else. And as a family-owned and privately held company, we can be nimble when we want to change the status quo in the industry. We're not the first poultry company to produce no antibiotics ever or work on animal care, but on our scale, we can change the industry, and that's what's happened. In 2014, when we declared we were no antibiotics ever in all of our poultry, the industry had to follow us, and you saw a lot of activity around a lot of chains of restaurants saying that they were going to go to no antibiotics ever. So we caused the industry to reach a tipping point and really to move in a new and different direction. And we think with animal care, the same thing is going to happen. Now, what role does collaboration play in this? It's about listening and learning. We get about 5,000 contacts a month from consumers, people interested in our business, asking a lot of questions, sometimes a lot of complaints. And we like complaints because that's how we improve an issue. We find out when they are speaking about it, and we fix the issue. And an extension of that is being a learning organization. And we bought Coleman Organic in 2010. And the first chickens that we were harvesting, we found were significantly different. The meat quality was very different. And so our job is to be a learning organization to find out why. Why is that product better than the stuff we're producing now? And that listening has to be both internal and external, not only the consumer, but we bought Coleman in 2010 and Nyman Ranch in 2014. We've learned more from them than they've learned from us. Nyman does all of their growing in pasture, no animal confinement, no gestation stalls for their pork. And these are all things that we're finding a lot about. Now, this photo here is really our, they also taught us that when people against our industry, animal rights people or animal care enthusiasts, complain about our industry, our usual response would be to ignore it. What we've learned from both Nyman and Coleman is we need to embrace these people, bring them in, listen to what they have to say, see how it compares to what we're doing, and we found that we're about 90% similar in a lot of the things that we're working on. So this photo was our Animal Care Summit, where we had farmers, customers, and animal care people going out to farms, some of our newer farms, and look at our progress and see what we're doing. And we just had our second Animal Care Summit about a month ago. So, we're working with organizations that normally would be opposed to our industry, but we think that collaboration with people like this helps demonstrate two important things: trust and transparency. And today our primary consumers Our largest consumer base is millennials, and trust and transparency are critically important to this group of consumers. So what we say in our company is we want to be the consumer's choice. We want to be the farmer's choice. If you're going to raise chickens, we want you to raise them with Perdue. And last, if you're a chicken and you had a choice of who wanted to be raising you, we'd want them to raise both wings and say we'd want Perdue to be raising us. You know, these things take a lot of work, a lot of resources. We have found that cost can be higher, but we believe that sustainability is more than just cost efficiency. We believe it's providing an affordable choice for our consumers, and that affordability is really important to make sure that, for example, in organic, that anybody can buy organic chicken and enjoy it. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Chief Technology Officer at Monsanto, Dr. Robb Fraley.
Great to be here. Let me start with a bit of a story, and it's 1934. A student in Minnesota is studying for his exams. He's been studying hard, has a sore throat, soon develops a fever, and pretty soon can't swallow. So he goes to the hospital and gets a devastating diagnosis. He has strep throat. He's not expected to live because there were no cures back then. And in fact, the intern who was administering had already made plans to extract his lymph nodes for a research study he was doing after he passed away. But the student lived. His teammate on the wrestling team actually died 2 days later from strep. And but he made it. So what does this have to do with agriculture? Well, the student was Dr. Norman Borlaug, and you may recognize him. He was the scientist who created used the advanced breeding techniques to create the high-yielding wheats that brought on the Green Revolution that saved billions of lives. He was awarded a Nobel Prize for that research. A lot of people don't realize that he faced opposition for bringing new technology into those global markets from people who were afraid of the technology. Norm was both a friend and a mentor, and he has helped me many times throughout my career with some excellent advice. I think the other thing about this story that's important is it tells us what life was like before we had advanced lab testing, before we had new classes of antibiotics. I just ask you, how many times in your lives have you or your child had strep throat? And how many times did you actually fear and had survival as the question? Today you can buy a DNA strep test on Amazon and use new antibiotics that are produced from a new class of microbes. So science has transformed our life, and it has had a tremendous effect over the last 100 years. Thanks to medical advances like vaccines and antibiotics, global life expectancy has doubled. New agricultural technologies like advanced breeding, like the GMO technology, has made it possible for farmers to grow more crops with less input, more yield, more food with less water, with less fertilizer, with less pesticides. In fact, by reducing the need to till and plow soils and reducing the release of carbon from soils, they've had a huge impact on the environment. In 2015, this technology has had the equivalent benefit of taking 12 million cars off the road for 1 year. If you look back, over the last 100 years, we've seen a tremendous change in agriculture. It used to be about half of the population of this country lived on the farm to produce food. Today it's less than 2%. So why should any of you care about this? I think that the key is, well, first of all, you all share an understanding and appreciation of the environment. And I think it's important to know that agriculture is becoming more and more sustainable. But we all share a bond. We all eat food. It's key to our survival. And yet, I don't think any of us probably spent 6 or 8 months this year harvesting crops and preparing our food. And that's been key. This science has literally liberated millions of people from spending their lives in fields, pulling weeds and pulling bugs off the crops, and enabled every one of you to do all the wonderful things that you've done in life. You know, most Americans really don't have much of a connection to farming anymore, and sometimes our pop culture makes it seem like farm life hasn't changed much since the 19th century. I was looking at a recent children's book about robots. This was published a couple years ago. Robots are a pretty high-tech topic, but when the robot downloads information about farming, what does he learn? He learns that horses can pull plows. Now, I grew up on a farm, and I can tell you, even in the 1960s, we were beyond horses pulling plows. In fact, today's farms are a lot more like Silicon Valley than they are Green Acres, if you remember that. So just like smartphones have changed our lives, smart farming is changing how we grow crops. You know, modern agriculture is using a mix of digital tools, algorithms, and artificial intelligence. Drones are buzzing over fields, collecting information on crop health and growth rates. We're using deep learning techniques to identify diseases on a real-time basis in the field, using the same technology that Facebook does to tag your friends. Data gathered by satellites and sensors implanted in the soil can trigger precision-controlled drip irrigation and fertilizer recommendations so that each and every plant can get exactly the amount of water and fertilizer they need. And so when you combine this data-based decision-making with all the advances in biology and chemistry, I have no doubt that we are capable of feeding the 10 billion people who will be on our planet in 2050. And we can do it using fewer resources than we do today. I think the real question is, will we be allowed to do it, or will fear and nostalgia get in the way? So just like in Dr. Borlaug's time, there are people today who don't understand new technology and are scared of it. And instead of trying to learn how it works, they choose to fearmonger. They impede the development of public-private partnerships by tormenting academics and NGOs who choose to work with private companies. They put political pressure on regulators and governments to restrict and ban technology. To capitalize on consumer fear, marketing firms create ad campaigns that yearn for the better, simpler days, creating a societal nostalgia for something that frankly never really existed. So for example, there is no such thing as natural food. The produce, the food that we eat, has been genetically modified by breeding by humans for thousands of years to create the fruits and vegetables we know today. So if you were eating a carrot grown the way nature originally intended it, it would be, as you can see from the picture, like eating a tree branch. Now, I personally have no problem with organic crops, but organic farming is not healthier or better for the environment. And the simpler days were not better days. They looked a lot more like this. Earlier this year, our team in Africa, in Zambia, saw this scene repeated every few hundred meters down the road. Do you know what it is? It's actually corn kernels carefully spread out on the road. So what happened in this village, they ran out of grain. So they had to go to their fields, pull the ears off the corn plants while they were still growing, pull the individual kernels off of the cob, dry them out so they could make their cornmeal. So you can imagine how much work and effort that takes, and all the other things they could or should have been doing with their time. But obviously people in these countries without access to modern ag technology still spend a huge part of their day procuring food. If they had access to the same technology that the U.S. farmer has, it's amazing to think what else they might accomplish. So I want to close and I want to share two numbers with you. The first is 0. That's the number of health issues from GMOs since they've been adopted more than 20 years ago. And here's the second number, 3.1 million. That's the number of children who still die of starvation every year, mostly in countries that don't allow modern agricultural technologies. So my call to action to everybody in this room is, we have to trust the data and the science instead of the fearmongers. As leaders, we must take a stand for science. If you want to learn more about modern agriculture, check out websites like modernag.org and share the information on your social networks. I do this all the time at Twitter. You can follow me at Robb Fraley. We must help society move past the fake news about food and keep it moving forward with modern ag. Otherwise, we're going to be swept backwards into a false nostalgia and imagine that we're making changes that create a better world when what we're actually doing is making the wrong decisions for the wrong reasons. And as a result, we're actually enslaving people into the distant past and jeopardizing our future. Thank you.